Current events, new trends, and helpful products. Let's see what's in today's Cup of Poe.
Welcome to the Daily Cup of Poe. I'm your host, Cindy Poe. And as always, I appreciate you taking time away to listen to what I have to say. I know the value of time, and I will never take it for granted that you are sharing your time with me. So let's grab a cup or a mug of your favorite beverage, and let's get into today's cup, oh my goodness, with episode 3. I just want to start with a reminder to ask you to please follow this podcast. Yes, we call it a podcast here. And also go to justanamericangirl.com. That's my blog site. And subscribe there with your email to receive weekly updates. My promise to you is to never send more than one email a week. There is no one that needs to hear from anyone in their inbox more than once a week. So it's just a way for us to stay in touch with you and give you updates, not to invade your life. And also a reminder that everything we talk about, all of the links and everything can be found in the show notes below. So be sure to check that out. Okay, let's get going. So today we are going to talk about the churches reopening in the U.S. We're going to talk about Dr. Fauci and some new remarks that he made right before the weekend about the reopening of America. And we're going to talk about the controversy of President Trump wearing or not wearing a mask. And of course, about his golfing. You know, that's always a big deal. But before we get into all of that, I do want to acknowledge that today in the United States is Memorial Day. And this is a day that we honor the men and the women who have given the ultimate sacrifice while serving in the U.S. military. This is a very important holiday, always was a very important holiday in my house, and I know it is in yours too. And we just want to take the time to acknowledge those who have given the ultimate sacrifice and to thank the families and acknowledge them of those who have loved ones who have given the ultimate sacrifice to fight for the freedoms that we continue to fight for every single day in this country. And it's an interesting time with everything happening, you know, in the country with the virus and the conversations around our freedoms. And so let's just make sure that we, you know, while we're spending our time with our loved ones and hopefully getting outside and enjoying some wonderful weather, especially after being locked up for so long, hopefully everyone is having a wonderful day and enjoying that. But let's not forget what this day is all about. And let's honor those men and women who have given the ultimate sacrifice so that you and I can have the freedoms that we have. So with that, we're going to get into our conversation about churches. So we know that the churches were deemed as essential by the president and the attorney general. This just recently happened. But the biggest question I have is I really do not understand what the issue is with churches being open in the first place. I feel like if we can have liquor stores and marijuana businesses and abortion clinics and lottery ticket agents are all open because they're deemed essential, then I do not understand why it would be a problem for anyone to have churches be deemed essential and be opened. Now, if you're someone that you don't worship and you don't go to church, I don't see how this affects you. What is the difference of someone going to a church and spending time around people or going to Walmart and spending time around people? Just the whole concept of this has never made sense, but for some reason it became this giant argument from the very beginning when things were closing down. And I find it really interesting when I look back at all of the problems and the situations that I've seen come up through these several weeks. For instance, I know the governor of Kentucky, on Easter Sunday, he had his police officers go and write down the license plates of all of the church goers and he was going to uh, mandate quarantine for any of those people who were at church. And I know a lot of churches were having online services, and they were having drive-in services as well. And even the drive-in services, they were trying to stop that from happening. And these are people who were sitting in their cars. I remember the Mississippi mayor of Greenville. He sent the entire police force. You would have thought it was a drug raid, the way that all the police descended upon this one little tiny church to stop them from having their service. And it's just like, it was such an overreaction. Like, in my head, I couldn't comprehend what the point of this was. I mean, who are they hurting if they're sitting in their cars? And for Bill Barr, Attorney General Bill Barr, to have to deem churches, as essential so that people could go and worship, even just sitting in their car, this just seemed so abstract to me. But when I started looking at all the cases that you were seeing on the news and the things that were being highlighted, the one common denominator, surprising or not, the one common denominator was that all of them were in states or cities that were Democratic, had Democrat leadership. So I don't know what that's about, because I have many, many, many Democrat friends, and they want to worship as well. So I'm not quite sure why all the problems were coming up in these Democratic run areas. I don't know if in my head, I'm just thinking, this is just a way to get attention. This is just a way to bring attention to, what you're doing, because I've been talking to so many of my friends who live in other places that you really never hear about. And during this whole entire time, they've been attending church every single week, either through drive-through services or inside some places were having church inside their churches quietly. They weren't making a big deal out of it. They were using social distancing. And so these particular places were causing this big fuss about it. And I just thought, this is like so ridiculous. So they have been deemed as essential. And I started looking over the CDC guidelines that they set up for these faith worshipers, and how to, they set up a whole guideline just for churches and synagogues and places of worship. And as I was reading the guidelines for them, and I'm reading what some of the churches have started already putting in place, like some churches I read about were taking the temperatures of each of the attendees. They were doing extra cleanings during the week, extra deep cleanings. They were doing the distancing in the church. They were using a lot of sanitizing products, all of these things that they were doing. And I was like, it's probably safer to be in the church than it is to be in your grocery store, So I just found it really funny that this subject of, worshiping on Sunday became such a big issue. And this is, when you think about some of the draconian rules that some of these leaders have been putting into place, when you think about that, it does seem like it's such an attack on those who worship. And we certainly are a country that believes in our freedom of religion. And I think that is something worth fighting for. So I congratulate the president and the attorney general for deeming churches as essential. And congratulations to all those churches who are going above and beyond to make it safe for their congregations to come together to worship. And if you are a person of faith, you understand, it's great to have these online services and everything, but there's just something about coming together in the spirit of worshiping and that just it can make such a difference in your life. And in this time of uncertainty, and in this time where we are, going through sadness and a little depression from being, locked up for so long and not being able to have many fun things to do, worshiping is a really big part of a lot of Americans' lives, and I'm really happy to see that they're able to get back to that. So I'd love to hear about any of the things that your church is doing to make it safer for you to be able to worship freely and enjoy that freedom that we have. So I wanted to also talk about the new remarks that happened on Friday from Dr. Fauci regarding reopening the states. And it's always funny to me when I watch how the news reports things and how people on social media react to things. I mean, for the longest time, everyone was, you have to listen to Dr. Fauci. He's the expert. He's the end all get all. He knows, he's the only person that you should be listening to. And now he's saying exactly what President Trump and the entire task force has been saying, is that, staying closed, keeping our states closed, can be just as detrimental as opening them up. We can have, effects that we're not seeing right now. So on Friday, Dr. Fauci, who is, as the article is stating, the nation's leading infectious disease expert, he warned Friday that stay-at-home orders that are intended to slow the spread of the coronavirus could end up causing irreparable damage if they are imposed for too long. Now, not to beat that horse, but this is what President Trump has been saying all along. Yes, we need to be safe, we need to be cautious, but we have to start reopening, because the consequences of staying closed for too long, from not only an economic standpoint, but also from a health standpoint, it is not healthy for us to be completely locked in our homes and not be outside or be enjoying, having fun and interacting with people. Interaction with people is a very important part of mental health and actually even our immune systems. I've said this before. It's like, we're all locked up and we're sanitizing everything, and our immune systems are slowly being just beat down, because for your immune systems to be strong, you really need to expose yourself to some germs. It's important. So he says, I don't want people to think that any of us feel that staying locked down for a prolonged period of time is the way to go. Now, this is what he said in an interview with CNBC. He said, now is the time, depending on where you are and what your situation is, to begin to seriously look at reopening the economy, reopening the country to try to get back to some degree of normal. Now, Dr. Fauci warned states not to reduce social distancing measures too quickly, advising that they must take very significant precautions. But in general, I think most of the country is doing it in a prudent way, he said, and there are obviously some situations where people might be jumping over that. I just say, please proceed with caution if you're going to do that. Now, we're seeing states like Florida and Georgia and other states as well, states that didn't even have high numbers of the coronavirus in their state at all, and they're able to kind of go back to normal. And I will tell you that I had a discussion over the weekend with a friend of mine who had just visited I'm not going to say where, but they had went to visit a little town that's very touristy, and they reported to me that everything was like normal there. Restaurants were open, people were out and about, they were being respectful, but most weren't wearing masks, and people are trying to get back to normal. And so when I heard this, I went online to see what their numbers are, and their numbers are very low. And their curve has been flattened for a very long time. So I think the point, and I think this is the point that Dr. Fauci was making, was that we can't judge the whole country by a particular place. New York City is different than, Montana. Washington State is different than Florida. You have to look at your area, and you have to decide and make decisions based on what is best for what is happening in your area. And I think that that's what's happening in some of these states where the governors are being, as I said before, very draconian with their laws and their rules. It's just somewhat ridiculous. And I wonder why they're doing it. And honestly, I think oftentimes it's for the attention. I know that sounds silly, but as I look and I read and I see who these leaders are, like when we look at Michigan, it's amazing to me the decisions that are made, and to try to figure out why they make the decisions is sometimes impossible because there's no logic. And that's scary when you have leaders that use no logic whatsoever. As you can say what you want about President Trump, but there's always a logic behind what he's seeing because he's reading, he's listening, and there's a logic behind everything. So I just thought it was really interesting to see Dr. Fauci, the person that we have been told by the mainstream media that he's the only person we should listen to. There was a whole conversation during the hearing, about Rand Paul versus Dr. Fauci. And it sounds like Dr. Fauci is agreeing with what Rand Paul actually had to say during that hearing. So I find this really interesting how this is coming around. I'm going to find it really interesting to see if this week, if the mainstream media stands behind what Dr. Fauci is saying. So that's going to be interesting too. So the next thing I wanted to talk about was President Trump and this whole craziness around the subject of him wearing a mask when he is giving his briefings, and most recently when he was touring in Michigan at the Ford factory there. And the first thing that I want to say is it's such a missed opportunity. People, you really have to stop just listening to the media and listening to the stuff they want to feed you. Because let me tell you, if you go, and in the show notes, I'm going to have the link to the entire briefing and everything that happened at the Ford factory. I think it's a little more than an hour long if you listen to everything. And it's not just President Trump speaking, it's all the people there in Michigan, all the things that they were saying, that these are people that are in charge of healthcare there and other agencies, and they're talking about their experiences. So I encourage you to watch it, because the sad thing is there was so much information given during that briefing that was just not only important information, but inspirational speeches that were given, and just feel good stuff that you really just need at this time to hear. But all of that was overshadowed because all the mainstream media wanted to talk about was how President Trump didn't wear a face mask, which, by the way, if you do a little research and look into it, when he was on the factory tour, he did wear a mask, and that's where it was mandatory. And that makes sense. When you're, in the factory, it's important, I believe, to follow those guidelines, not only because of the virus, but because of other things. But when he came out to give his speech, as he always does, he did not have his mask on. And, people are like, he should set an example. But, there is not a person, I don't believe that there is a person in the United States that does not understand that the President of the United States is being tested. Not just, do you have symptoms, but tested for the virus continuously. He is not infected. And the whole point of wearing a mask is to not infect other people. president of the United States knows that he will know right away if he has this virus because he is tested so often. So him not wearing a mask, I don't see what the big deal is. And if you're saying, well, he's setting a bad example, if somebody wants to compare themselves to the president and say, well, the president's not wearing one, then I shouldn't wear one, then, you know, that's a whole nother subject of idiocy that we can have, because you can't compare yourself to somebody who's being tested on a regular basis for the virus. And, you know, it just seems to me that it's just a talking point to talk over what's really happening and what's important. And that is unfortunate. And that is why the mainstream media is so useless anymore, is because that's all what they're talking about. They're not giving us the information, the good information that is being talked about during these briefings and in these meetings and these places that the president is going. And they are doing a disservice to everyone by focusing on these petty, ridiculous things. You know, people talk all the time about how the president is petty and he's attacks the media all the time. Well, he does that in response to the media being so blatantly misleading. And so I think that I certainly know that Trump supporters, and I know a lot of people who do not necessarily support President Trump, who still will say the media is not journalism anymore, and they are doing a disservice to people by giving us bad information or not giving us the right information. So this trip to the Ford factory was a great example of that. There was a lot of information that got overlooked. So unless you actually went back and watched the video of the whole thing, and I do have that link so that you can watch it and hear the very important messages that were being told during that briefing and the meetings in the beginning and everything. And I encourage you to listen to that because you're not going to get it from the media. When the president chose to take his mask off when he started to brief at the end of the tour and the meeting prior to, which people weren't wearing a mask during that time because they were social distancing. And again, remember, if you're social distancing, the mask is not necessary. The CDC is saying that if you are practicing social distancing, then the mask is not necessary because you're not getting close enough to anybody to infect them. And remember, the CDC just came out with another report saying that you're not going to get the contamination from surfaces the way that they originally thought. So that's another subject. But because he took off his face mask and decided not to wear that, the Attorney General there in Michigan, Dana Nessel, had no idea who she was until all this happened, which again brings me back to the whole point of, I wonder if they start these petty little things so that they can be noticed in the media, because I had no idea who this person was. But she decided to go on the news and proclaim that President Trump was not welcomed back to Michigan. Now, President Trump did really well in Michigan. President Trump will win Michigan in November. So your Attorney General now is telling the president, who you voted for, the majority of you voted for, that he's not welcome. The president of the United States is not welcomed in her state because he didn't wear a mask after he had been tested and he knew he didn't have the virus. He didn't wear a mask, and so he's not welcome back. Now, to me, the child is her. This was a ridiculous statement. It was very juvenile for her to get on the news and make this big fuss about this, instead of talking about all the great things that the people of Michigan that live in the state that she represents, all these wonderful things that they were saying about what their state was doing. She focused on the president isn't welcome anymore. Now just think about that. Now, unfortunately, Michigan has a governor, Gretchen Whitmer, who, believe it or not, she's only been in office a year, just a little more than a year. So you guys have her until 2022. You guys have her. That's how long you have her for. She's barely been in a little more than a year. And she has the most draconian laws and rules of just about any state that I have studied and listened to. Ridiculous things like, oh, you can shop at Walmart, but you can't buy garden supplies. They're non-essential, so we have to rope those off. So you got to be stuck at home, but while you're there, don't do any gardening, don't do any, home improvements. And if you're a Michigan resident who has two homes, you have like your lake house and your regular home, you can't travel between the two. You have to stay in one of them and you can't go to the other one, even though you own it and it's your residence. You can't go there. These are the kinds of things that are just insanity to me. That is not what this lockdown was supposed to be about. This is not about safety. That is about power. These are power hungry individuals. And this, if you can't find anything good that came from this virus, here's something you can look at. Look at the power-hungry people. Look at the power-hungry people and think about that when you're voting next time. Now, like I said, unfortunately, with your governor there in Michigan, you've got her for a while because she's too new. So you're going to be stuck with her for a while, which is really interesting and sad all at the same time. But I hope that people will remember these ridiculous actions come the next election. And of course, with all of this, and President Trump coming down kind of hard on the governor of Michigan and the attorney general, you have let's see, it was Senator McCaskill, I think, who played, of course, the empowered woman card. President Trump is threatened by smart, strong women, which is totally ridiculous because President Trump surrounds himself with strong, smart women. And so I find it utterly ridiculous when women drop that empowered one. Oh, he's just afraid of us. Yeah, I'm pretty sure he's not. So, check yourself. But I just thought that whole issue that was revolving around the president wearing a mask is totally ridiculous, irrelevant. It's just something that they can play on airtime so they don't have to talk about the really awesome stuff that is happening. They don't have to play the snippets from the people who are working in the health departments in Michigan, in Detroit, talking about all the wonderful things that they've been able to accomplish. So they don't want to play that. They want to just be the childish media who just has to be putting down this president, and it's really getting old. And I get so many messages and emails from people telling me how they just don't even know where to get information from anymore because YouTube is taking everything down. The media doesn't tell the truth. Social media is blocking and fact checking things, and they're not doing a good job of fact checking. So that's part of the platform here for me is I'm creating a whole site where all of those banned videos and all of that information is going to be available on my site. So again, reminding you to go to justinAmericanGirl.com, my blog site, and there is going to be a page just filled with the videos of where I've collected them myself. So I own the links to them, and I will be posting those videos, and they will always be there for you to look at. And not necessarily that I'm saying all of them are factual too, but shouldn't you be given the right to decide for yourself and to research and listen and make your own decisions about things? We're not children, we're adults here. And, we can figure out the truth for ourselves. We do not need someone else telling us their version of the truth. And that's the only one we're allowed to hear. You should be able to listen to many sides and decipher, but I digress. So the whole thing with the president and the face mask drove me absolutely insane. And as if that wasn't enough, then of course they all lost their heads when President Trump got on the golf course for the first time in several months. Now, here's where I'm going to disagree with conservatives and even President Trump on this when he would talk about how, President Obama took so many vacations, and he did. President Obama took a lot of vacations, and that's, that's a conversation I guess you can have, but it's sort of ridiculous because I think that when you're somebody who's in a stressful, high-powered position, especially when you're someone that is going to be in charge of protecting me and my family, I want you to take some vacations and have some downtime and relax. Now, I think there are some questions that can be brought up as to when people take vacations. There are some times that you should not be taking a vacation, but I have watched this from the time the impeachment started all the way through when we first started talking about this virus. And President Trump has been working constantly all the way through. And anybody who says that he's lazy and he only has one appointment on his calendar every day, you're ridiculous, because then you are truly not paying attention to what's true. The man works all day long. He's running all over the place. So if he felt like he was in a position that he could go and play a round of golf at, by the way, his own course that he owned, then he should be able to do that. Presidents should be able to take vacations. They should have days off. They should have time that they can have some downtime. So don't come at me with the argument that, President Trump complained about President Obama, taking vacation, because I didn't agree with it when they talked about that either. Now, there were times, like I do remember, President Trump talks about this a lot, where Obama was on the golf course right after announcing the beheading of an American. That was a little unfortunate. So, maybe look at that a little bit. But people who were saying, there's 100,000 Americans dead at Donald Trump's hand and he's out playing golf, that is so utterly ridiculous. And believe me, it makes you look a lot sillier than it makes him look incompetent. Because if that's all you got, then you have nothing. The man deserves a vacation. I don't want to hear about the expense of it, because the expense of any president going on vacation has nothing to do with the security of keeping him safe, because that security is with him wherever he is. It's with his family. That security is there. What is so expensive is that wherever he goes, he is followed with this entourage of people. And that's not about security for him. That's about security for the country. The cost of his outings is not about protecting his family. It's because the president has to be able to command the federal government during any unexpected crisis. So, if it appears that while he's on vacation, he doesn't have every person and every available resource to protect the country, doesn't that leave us vulnerable? And the man needs to be able to take a vacation. So that's where the expense of this comes. So if you're doing the Trump golf count, then you're just a jackass who really just doesn't have an argument, and you need to find something else and move on. So, because the man deserves, in all this time of not, doing his favorite activity, which happens to be golf, he should be allowed to do that. And that's what I have to say about that. So I'm going to wrap up this episode of Daily Cup of Poe and remind you to please subscribe to the podcast, or the Poecast as I like to call it. And also go to justinAmericanGirl.com. And I promise you, pinky promise, only one email a week will you be getting. And also I wanted to, for those of you, my conservative friends, there is a Trump 2020 app that has been developed, and there are some amazing shows on there with a lot of good information. Like I said, it's very hard to get good information about what's really going on. So in the show notes, there's a link for you to download that app. And also down below is a link to donate to the Republican Party to help us win the presidency, as well as the Senate and House seats that are up in November. Join my team, Ride the Red Wave 2020. I have the link below. You can give your donations there to help support all of your conservative senators and congressmen and women, as well as the president. We definitely want to make sure that we are bringing victory this November. As you can tell, it's really important that we have the right people in charge. So, as always, I'm going to leave you with Mama Po's invitation to be fearless, be gracious, and be authentic. Peace out, everyone.